Hello, welcome to today's webinar. Can I just ask you to check in the chat box whether or not you can hear me? Okay, so if you can just type yes in the chat box, that'd be fantastic. And then I will start. Fabulous. Okay, so welcome to the webinar. Today I'm going to be talking about data protection is common sense. But is it common practice? I will talk through some examples, and at the end of the session there will be an opportunity for you all to ask me any questions in relation to the content that I cover today. I will also ask you at the end whether or not you would like for me to follow up with you. Obviously you can say no at any time. Okay, so now that I know everyone is okay and they can hear me, we will start. So I'll start with a little bit of an intro as to who I am. So I'm the co-founder. My name's Kellie Peters. I'm the co-founder of Data Basics. I've been working in the field of information governance for around 20 years in both public and private sector. And I am very passionate about data privacy, data protection, and governance, and hopefully that will come across in today's webinar. So I'm going to start off with some interesting insight that I read this week. So the Allianz Risk Barometer report, which is quite lengthy, was released this month, and they highlighted different countries in terms of cyber incidents and their kind of, it wasn't just cyber, but the threat of risk. And what really interested me was the main risks. And these are data or security breaches, as you can see, access to deletion of personal data, 2, espionage, hacker attack, ransomware, which we're seeing a higher number of ransomware attacks in the news, denial of service, and for me, what I found really interesting was errors and mistakes by employees. And we will talk about some of the things that I believe are common sense, but not common practice in terms of reducing some of these risks. Now, I accept that you're never going to eliminate risk entirely, but we can certainly reduce the risk to our organisations. So it'd be useful to just talk to you about what I refer to as the rule book, essentially the General Data Protection Regulation, which came in just under 2 years ago, has a set of rules that we as organisations have a responsibility to follow if we are processing personal data. So I hope you'll indulge me. I'm just going to briefly touch on these just to make sure that we're all up to date with what those rules are. And then I'm going to talk to you about the examples. So the basic rules are, as organisations, we have to be fair, honest and transparent with individuals whose data we are processing. If not, that can get us into quite a lot of trouble and complaints from individuals. We need to be clear about our different purposes for processing data, why we process it for marketing, employee information, client engagement, etc., etc. We need to be clear about that we're only processing information that's essential to us to make our decisions. So we shouldn't be collecting more than we need or less than we need. So the Goldilocks rule of only process what you need. I'm going to give an example about accuracy as we talk through today's webinar. We have a responsibility to keep data accurate and up to date. I'm going to talk to you about retention in terms of only keeping individual data for as long as is necessary, because in my experience, it's not common practice to have a retention schedule, and I'll talk about that as we go on. We have a responsibility to keep data safe and secure. And again, one of the examples I will talk about is some of the things that very much should be common practice, but are not. And hopefully you may have some questions or insights that I'll also be able to use. We have to respect individuals' rights to privacy, and obviously this is what individuals can complain about. They also have the right to know what we have. They have the right for data to be corrected. They have the right to object, and they have the right to ask for information to be erased where applicable. So it's not a blanket delete data. And as organisations, as well as individuals within organisations, we have a responsibility to adhere to the rules of the regulation. So that's me talking about the rules. I have simplified a regulation into one slide, and it's vastly more complex than that, but I think it gets the point across. So I've used what I've done throughout the presentation. I've used examples that have hit the press to emphasise why it's not as common practice as I would like. So we have a responsibility to share information responsibly. So if you are sharing information about your clients to a third party, if you are sharing information with a client or with other organisations within your network, or even offices within your organisation, we need to make sure we share that data sensibly. And we also need to make sure that we have checked it before we sent the information, and that we make sure that what's in the systems are valid when we're sharing it. So the example is, you may have seen over the Christmas period, whilst we were all enjoying a festive break, hopefully, the New Year's Honours List was published for a very short amount of time, just after Christmas, with full address details of those that are on the honours list. Included in that were individuals that were obviously celebrities, but were also involved in defence, in the security of this country, in judicial roles. That essentially that information could have put individuals at risk. Now, the sharing the information of who's on the honours list happens every year. That's not a problem. What should be common sense is to check in that before you upload the file online, to make sure that only the relevant information is being shared. And the example of the gangs database was that it contained information on individuals that had no risk of being a gang member. So they had a score of 0, but their information was shared with organisations that should not have seen that information. It happens very easily. It's incredibly easy to, with email, attach an Excel spreadsheet and send it to the wrong individual or wrong organisation when we're in a rush. So the common sense approach would be to take a minute or two to double check before you upload, before you send, before you share, to make sure that you know who you're sharing it with. They absolutely have the right to see the information, and you're only sharing what is absolutely necessary. I've taken a slide from the National Cybersecurity Centre. I'm not going to go all of it, but I wanted to talk about practical password management. So for me, it is common practice for organisations to have a stance on passwords. Now, not always is it enforced, and I think that is what the common sense element is, that you should have passwords, but the common practice is, how do you enforce that password management? So do you enforce complex passwords with the variety of letters, special characters, and numbers? Do you make individuals aware how easily their password could be accessed by others? So there's shoulder surfing, there's passwords on post-it notes, which I commonly see. There are obviously the more complex incidents, such as phishing scams, coercion, or brute force. And you could see from the Allianz Risk Barometer that that's number 2 for the UK in terms of ways that people access information. So for me, organisations should make their staff aware of what the password process is for the organisation, and then enforce that. What I would also encourage, and I see too often is that individuals have one password for everything. So whilst I use a password manager, so I remember one very complex password to get into my password manager, it manages all the rest. Because we're accessing so many different websites and so many different systems, there's a tendency to want to use one password because it's easy. So for me, the common sense approach is to educate staff about having different passwords and how they can store those passwords securely. For example, using a password manager. Now, this is something that is really high profile. It's in the news recently. So I think this, for me, is almost a no-brainer. You want to fix your known vulnerabilities. But my question is, do you know the vulnerabilities that you have? Now, depending on the size of the network that you're managing, it may just be you. You may just be a sole trader or an independent consultant, and it's just you and your computer. Do you know if your system is up to date? Do you have all the most up-to-date antivirus software updates on your system? If you have a larger network, do you have any kind of checks to see whether the computers and the devices attached to that network have the most up-to-date patches? And not just for your software systems, but for the actual network infrastructure as well. Because as you can see here, 99% of all exploits use known vulnerabilities. Typically, those are at least 6 months old. So it's not new. We obviously have Microsoft Windows 7, which was launched 10 years ago, has come to the end of its support. And yet you can see here on this slide, there are a couple of 100 million users that are still using that system. So for me, the important part of this is understand what your vulnerabilities are and then plan to fix them, because these are the areas that will potentially cause you problems. And the Dixon's Curry's retail group were fined under the Data Protection Act, even though it was a fine this year, it was under the 1998 Act, were fined £500,000 because their point of sale software wasn't up to date. So my encouragement to everybody that's on the webinar, whether they listen to it live or afterwards, is to identify your vulnerabilities and plan to patch them in. I can see that I'm getting some questions, so I'm going to answer all the questions at the end of the webinar. So I will just ask you to bear with me, and I will come back to the questions at the end. So as I said, as part of the rulebook, one of the requirements underneath the regulation, not just under GDPR, but under the previous act of the 1998, there was a requirement that organizations don't keep data longer than is absolutely necessary. Now, I appreciate that there is an element of comfort in holding on to information because it's about the what if. So we need to be confident when we're thinking about how long we're going to hold data. So the common sense is we only want to keep it for as long as it's necessary. I think where we fall down is that we don't have retention schedules for the different types of data that we're processing to allow us to make decisions as to whether or not we should still hold that information or whether or not we need to archive it or even delete it because it is no longer required within the business. It's no longer needed for us to make business decisions. So the practical data protection is that in your data protection policy, you may have guidance on how long you need to follow that. So my encouragement to you is to find that document and understand if your systems and processes support the retention periods that are set out in that document, and then follow them. Because also within the rule book, you would have remembered that individuals have the right to access information. So an individual could ask what information you hold on them and why you're still holding on to data that they feel is irrelevant. So bear that in mind. If you need to securely archive data, because not everything is electronic, or you may wish to securely archive the data electronically, have an appropriate process in place. And an example of that was, this is the first, well, it's not the first, it's essentially there was a fine in the summer, but the biggest fine to date from a GDPR for the UK was a pharmacy that essentially stored their health records in a storage unit which was not secure. And the Information Commissioner said that from the security principle, that wasn't acceptable. So the common sense approach is only keep data for as long as absolutely necessary. Make sure that all individuals in your organisation know how to follow that, and then consider some kind of audit. You know, how do you demonstrate that those retention periods are actually being met? Obviously, if data is of value to you, but you don't need the personal data element of it, you can look at ways of being able to anonymise data. So whilst we may need to, at the end of retention periods, get rid of whole personal records, there will be incidences where someone will tell you that they want their data rectified, or they want their certain parts of their information to be deleted, as is their right. So it makes sense for us to say, yeah, of course we'll update it. The challenge I have, or the question I have for everybody listening to the webinar is that done immediately? When a customer phones you up, if they tell you they've changed their email address, or they've moved address, or a member of staff has told you they've got married, how do you make sure that the information that is being sent to you, or to whoever is responsible for that update, is updating the systems appropriately? So the common practice would be, as ideally in my world, I would like to see it immediately, but I appreciate that, you know, people are busy, but I would want within at least of the month of being notified that the data is being updated, because inaccurate information costs businesses quite a lot of money. And the example that I've got on the slide here was last year, TSB had a number of issues with data security and data protection. Now, users or their bank account members logged into their accounts and were accessing other people. So they logged in under their name and what they were seeing other people's information. But the thing that compounded this issue was afterwards they sent letters to account holders addressed to a different account. So it was inaccurate information being received. So that has a massive impact on people's trust in you, as well as your reputation. So the common practice should be update the information as quickly as possible, but then think about, on an annual basis, if you have staff, do you do any type of annual checks to make sure the information you have on them is still accurate? So if they have moved and they've forgotten to tell you, can you send out some kind of update to say, hi, as part of the annual update, can you please make sure the information we hold on you is correct? There's nothing stopping you from having conversations with your customers, if you haven't spoken to them in a while, to just make sure that the information you have on systems for them is accurate. So build that accuracy element as part of your everyday business processes. And obviously, anything that's inaccurate should be deleted if it's no longer needed. I don't know how many of you travel or have to work remotely. However, I do find that a lot of individuals are not necessarily aware of their surroundings. So when I give an example of don't leave your laptop on the train open while you go to the bathroom, people might be like, well, that's really common sense, Kelly. Why would I leave my laptop open when I go to the bathroom? Yeah, I have seen it. Even this year, and this year is only 3 weeks long, I have seen occurrences where people just get up, go to the bathroom and believe that no one's going to be looking over their shoulder, no one's going to check their computer. And who of us are going to challenge an individual in that next seat to say, you shouldn't be accessing that computer? How often do you see in coffee shops, people get up for a refill of coffee, but they leave their mobile phone or their laptop open? I see it very frequently. So it's about making remote workers aware to be of their surroundings and consider, we talked about password management and shoulder surfing. Think about privacy screens. 3M offer a privacy screen, which is about £50. It's a lot of money, I appreciate. However, it means that people literally cannot look over your shoulder at what you're working on. Think about the public Wi-Fi. Public Wi-Fi is, as I said here, a hacker's dream. So are there ways in which that you can give remote workers secure access to your systems, maybe using a Wi-Fi dongle that is provided by your mobile phone provider, or asking your staff if they can use their personal hotspot as part on their mobile phone and reimbursing them if there's a cost of that? Because it's very easy for people to get access to information over the public Wi-Fi. And the other thing I see a lot, and you may have experienced this too, is, and it's typically on trains, to be fair, I'm on a train and suddenly I'm hearing someone repeat their credit card, or I'm hearing not just a credit card, but a car registration number, their wife's maiden name, and then you hear it again and you're like, hold on, I think you're on an insurance call. And by the end of that call, I know where you live, your car registration, when your car's going to be delivered, what your credit card is, what the 3-digit number is at the back, and the expiry date. Because people typically don't think that anyone else is listening. Now, it may just be me, but typically I always find the train goes really silent when those conversations are going on. But if you're on a regular commute, and I've also experienced this, where you hear someone on the phone, sometimes because you are regular commuters, you may know what they are talking about, and they may have inadvertently disclosed confidential and potentially personal information. So where you're having confidential conversations and you're in a public place or you're on public transport, I see no reason why you can't ask the individuals, you can phone them back, because you are not in a place where it's appropriate for that conversation to be had. And again, it's about educating staff to make them aware of that. Do have contingency plans in place. I can find no better example at this moment in time than Travelex. The Travelex website, when I wrote these slides earlier in the week, was still down. It'd been down since New Year's Eve because apparently, though they are denying it, there had been a hack and 5 gigabytes of customer data has been obtained and they are being held to ransom. Now, as an individual, when you're seeing this going on, you may start to lose trust if the website's not going back up. Banks are not able to engage with Travelex at the moment to be able to do the foreign currency exchanges. So the question is, what is the contingency plan? So you'd want to believe that all organizations have a philosophy about backup. So do you back your data up? Do you back your mission critical business data up? You may say, yes, that's really great. My next question would be, have you ever tested the backup? Do you know that actually you can genuinely restore your systems from that backup? If you can't, then you might want to check that. In terms of, not that I'd want to wish this on anybody, but if the building was to catch fire, are your backups stored in the cloud? Are they stored at another site? So actually you could restore all of your systems within hours of your system going offline. What happens if you were subject to a ransomware attack or a phishing scam where suddenly computers are suddenly being infected? Is there a process where you would be able to know which computers were affected, that you can disconnect them and isolate them from the network? So these are all important plans, because your customers and your staff want to be reassured that you have the necessary processes in place and staff are aware of what they are, and that you can be back up and operational quickly. So I would argue that it should be common sense, but there are too many examples in the press where it doesn't appear to be common practice. So think about, for you in your business, how do you ensure ongoing confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your network and your information systems? If you don't manage them, how do your vendors give you that level of confidence that they are protecting your vital data? You want the reassurance that your systems can be restored and then access to that personal data can be timely. And you really want to be able to test these. So if you're going to be putting in a process to make sure you know what your vulnerabilities are across the network, also consider what methods you're going to do to regularly test and assess your backups and contingencies. I think it goes without saying that it's common sense to want to train your staff. But what level of training had staff been given? And we're now almost 2 years into the GDPR. Were staff trained 18 months ago and it's now done and they haven't been retrained? Or have you introduced new policies and procedures that they may not be aware of since the regulation came in? So the Information Commissioner is very clear that we are responsible for making sure that our staff have an awareness of the regulation, how it applies to them, and those individuals that are in more complex roles. Think about HR, think about IT. Have they been given the more specific training that will help support things such as access requests, rectification requests, things such as what to do in a breach and contingency plans? Because as you saw from the risk barometer report, employee error is number 3 of the top things or tasks or areas of risk that organizations face. Training helps you reduce that risk. So now I've got a question already that's come through whilst I was talking. Here's an opportunity now for you to ask me any questions about what I've covered, for you to type in the box, and then I'll just do a little bit of spiel about data basics, and we'll then close the webinar. So please do ask me any questions that you have. The question that I have at the moment is, can I recommend a good password manager? So I use something that's called Dashlane, but there are a number of other password managers out there. There's LastPassword, there's 1Password, I believe. And for anyone that's interested, I have a list of what was last year's top 5 password managers. But again, it's something that you could easily Google, to be fair. Of the attendees, are there any other questions about what I've covered? Whilst I'm waiting for any other questions, I'll give you a little bit of blurb about data basics. So I absolutely, so the question is, can I send a copy of the slides? So absolutely, you can have a copy of the slides. The webinar is also being recorded. It will be available on our website next week, and everybody that was registered and has attended will get a link to the recording, so they will have a copy and can watch it at any time. So we offer data protection services, which includes on-site and e-learning. We help organisations identify gaps, either through what does their policy say versus what are their processes, and we can do audits. We write policies and procedures for those organisations that may have a subject access request or be going through a breach and they're not sure what to do. We offer expert hours. If you're not sure where your data is, not sure where it's stored, how long you should be keeping it, we help organisations map their data. And today's an example of the webinars that we do. I'm doing a webinar on the 28th on Data Privacy Day this month with Freeth, and we'll be talking about the challenges for 2020 and beyond, so you might be interested in that. And we're doing a breach investigation webinar in February, and then a recruitment what to do when someone leaves the organisation webinar in March. If there are no further questions, that's fine. What I would simply ask is if any of you would like a follow-up call with me, there is no obligation. Please indicate in the in the chat box. If not to worry, I will let you know about future webinars, but I will not contact you for any other reason. Obviously, if you do have any other questions, you can email me. My email address is on the slide, and you can obviously follow us through any of our social media channels. So I would like to take a moment to really thank you for the fact that you've given me time today to listen to me to talk about practical data protection. Hopefully it's been useful. Feel free to follow up with any questions that you have afterwards. If there is no other questions, I will draw this webinar to a close and wish you all a very good day. And I hope that you will join me in future webinars. So thank you all very much, and have a great day.